Okay, Chris, we're going to talk about the G word.
No.
No, it's the G
The
word.
dreaded G
We have
word.
to talk about it. It is, of course,
Grammar.
grammar. Because how to teach grammar, people get worried about grammar, especially if, like us, you were never taught grammar at school. And so what are some of the principles we can bring to teaching grammar to students?
Don't worry about it, first of all.
Easy to say.
Easy to say, and you will be initially, and that's absolutely fine. But don't start with the grammar. That's the other key thing. Introduce the grammar by stealth.
By stealth. Okay, this sounds interesting.
So the key thing when you're teaching grammar is you want to start with a context. And that's, so for example, maybe you're teaching past tenses, and the context that we would use past tenses in could be talking about your weekend.
What did you do at the weekend?
Yeah, yesterday I was doing this, it was raining, etc. That context makes the meaning of the grammar clear, so it conveys the meaning to the students. And it also helps connect it with real life as well. So you start with that, you start with a story, for example, and then you move on to focus on.
And see, that's interesting because a lot of people would think, okay, if I'm teaching a grammar lesson, let's make sure everybody knows the rules. But what you're saying is that that's not the best place to start.
Those rules don't have any meaning. So starting with that focus on rules is not helpful to the students. The students really want to know what the meaning is, first of all.
Starting with the context, we're starting with a conversation, we're starting with the story, and then we're teasing the grammar out of that. So they're using the grammar without even realizing it, and then that's where the stealth comes in, because you come bam in with the rule, but then the rule makes more sense.
Exactly.
And should you spend more time teaching the grammar or more time practicing the grammar? How do you think about the balance?
Ideally, you want to spend a lot more time practicing the grammar. So another worry that teachers have is when it gets to the grammar focus part of the lesson, that they have to talk a lot and they have to lecture and kind of force this information into the students until they've got it. That's not very effective. So actually, we spend less time on that, and generally we don't explain, we don't lecture the meaning to the students. We actually tease it out of the students, so we ask questions to check that the students understand. We spend less time on that, and then we spend more time on practice and getting the students to actually use the language. I remember when I was at school and I learned grammar for German or French, I remember the teacher talking for about 20 minutes.
And blackboard full of notes and
exactly.
examples.
And we had a little gap fill, and then that was the end of the lesson and the bell rang. So we never really got to use it, and that's so important.
So really what you're saying is that there's a little bit of learning required. It might be a rule or two, but then in order for that to sink in, the students have to go off and practice that. And is that limited to the classroom? I mean, does the student learn grammar in the classroom only? Is that where learning happens, or is it where else can
it starts there?
It starts in the classroom.
But we really want to give them exposure to that language outside of the classroom. What kind of things would you do?
Well, if we're teaching grammar, see, the thing is, the rule is a tool that we use to teach. And we're used to actually having rules written in textbooks. But in reality, grammar is not, I mean, this is my view of grammar, it's not a rule, a formula that you can write up. It's a living, breathing thing. Yes. It lives out there in the real world, in the language. And sometimes, as native speakers, we break the rules ourselves. Yes. And so you want to, where there is a rule, it's useful to teach that. But what we really want to do with students is actually show them how that bit of grammar lives out in the real world. And so you want to give them stories to read, for example, so they can see that grammar being used. You want to really, as the teacher, I think you want to direct them to things that they can read and listen to, and you know that they will spot the grammar in those materials, and then so they get exposure to it that way, and then that also has the great benefit of them when they come back to the next lesson, they can say, yeah, I read that story, and now let's talk about the grammar. Can you go through and highlight some of the bits in that story where you saw that grammar being used? So you're not lecturing about rules, you're guiding them towards...
And it's not just textbook language, they can see that it exists for real. And what you're teaching them is real, it doesn't just exist in the classroom.
Makes them less anxious about it as well. It makes them less anxious. They're also much more likely to learn the grammar naturally, because they've seen it being used. I don't know about you, but once I started teaching grammar in this way, I found it a lot more fun to teach as well.
Yes, absolutely.